Welcome to Lost in Disclosure, and thanks for watching Lost in Disclosure.
The sun slipped behind the mountains west of Phoenix, its final rays stretching low across the desert. Shadows grew long among the saguaro, painting the earth in dusky bands of violet and gold. Heat shimmered from the rocks for a few lingering moments, then faded into the cooling hush of evening. The Sonoran Desert, ancient and sprawling, exhaled quietly as the day came to its end. A warm breeze stirred the dust, whispering across dry creek beds and low mesquite trees. Somewhere far off, the call of a coyote echoed once and then ceased. Above, the sky bloomed into a gradient of soft indigo, deepening as the stars began to appear, one by one, like tiny lanterns flickering to life in a vast cathedral. They spread outward in every direction, sharp and clear, unhindered by cloud or haze. It was the kind of night that made the sky feel impossibly close and infinite at once. In the outskirts of Phoenix, homes nestled against the low hills, people settled into the rhythm of the evening. An older couple, Frank and Eileen, sat on their porch with glasses of iced tea, watching the sky slowly deepen in color. They didn't speak much, didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the slow hum of cicadas and the whisper of the wind. Frank lit a small citronella candle, and its flame flickered as the light dimmed around them. Farther south, in the town of Maricopa, a young boy named Jason lay on the hood of his father's truck, pointing out constellations he had learned in school that week. His dad, a tall man in dusty work boots, leaned back beside him, quietly correcting star names with a smile. "That one's Orion," he said. "See the belt there?" Jason nodded, eyes wide, the night sky reflected in his pupils. The desert, at this hour, felt both vast and intimate. A place where time seemed to move slower, where the air itself carried stories older than any town or road. There was no rush here. The land had witnessed generations come and go, always returning to silence. Up north, near Prescott, a family took a walk along a gravel road that curved gently between fields of brush and prickly pear. The mother looked up often, scanning the stars while her children chased each other ahead. Her husband carried a flashlight he never turned on. There was enough light from above to guide their way, the starlight sharp and pale as bone. Elsewhere, across the state, the same sense of stillness unfolded. Telescopes were adjusted on backyard tripods. Lawn chairs creaked under the weight of quiet observers. The faint glow of distant towns sat low on the horizon, a reminder of life continuing, but gently, softly. There was a comfort in that silence, a kind of ancient calm that wrapped around the land like a blanket. The saguaros stood tall, frozen in their quiet watch over the desert floor. The ground beneath held the warmth of the day, and above the air cooled gently as if the world had reached a perfect balance. The sky held itself in suspension. And yet some felt it, something subtle, a tension barely there, humming low beneath the calm. The kind of feeling that causes one to glance up without knowing why. Dogs paused at fence lines. An owl flew low over a field, wings wide and silent. A driver on a quiet highway slowed for a moment, unsure what he'd seen out of the corner of his eye. Nothing. Only the stars. But above it all, the heavens watched in return.
If you found this video helpful or interesting, go ahead and click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll always stay updated with our latest content. We truly appreciate your support.
A glint, high and faint, appeared just over the ridge to the northwest. Not bright, not dramatic, just present. Too still to be a plane, too steady to be a star. It hung there, almost unnoticed, as if deciding whether it wanted to be seen. A second glimmer joined it, then a third. They hovered, then faded, without fanfare, as though swallowed by the night itself. In the distance, a pickup rumbled down a dirt road. The driver, an older man with sun-leathered hands and a half-lit cigarette, glanced upward, catching something unfamiliar above the trees. He narrowed his eyes, watching. Then, nothing. He blinked, and the sky was ordinary again. Only stars. Perhaps it was nothing. A trick of night, the play of air and light, in a place as strange and eternal as this. But for those who stood beneath that wide Arizona sky on that March evening in 1997, the air felt just a little different, charged with something ancient and waiting. The breeze shifted, carrying with it the scent of creosote and cooling stone. Porch lights flickered. The sky above grew darker still, now full of depth and movement, as if waiting to speak. No one yet stirred in alarm. No one called out or turned on the news. The desert kept its peace. But something had shifted quietly, as if the world had taken in a breath and held it.
If you found this video helpful or interesting, go ahead and click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll always stay updated with our latest content. We truly appreciate your support.
No one could have known what the desert was about to witness. No one could have known what the sky was about to reveal. The first lights. Henderson to Paulden. The quiet town of Henderson, Nevada, settled comfortably beneath the early evening sky. It was a time when the last hints of daylight were melting away, and stars began to emerge, shy and scattered at first, then growing bolder as the sky darkened. In a small backyard, a retired police officer named Jim sat in a worn wooden chair. His radio hummed softly nearby, playing a low-key country tune, the kind that drifts lazily through the air without demanding attention. Jim's eyes were lifted toward the heavens, scanning the familiar constellations that he had watched for decades. Suddenly, something caught his gaze. A faint glow, unusual against the backdrop of steady stars. At first, he thought it might be an aeroplane or a helicopter, but there was no blinking light, no roar of engines. The glow was steady, calm, and moved slowly, almost deliberately. Then more lights appeared, 5 in all, arranged in a neat boomerang shape. They hovered low and silent, gliding across the sky with an eerie grace. The formation was tight, the lights steady, glowing a soft, pale yellow. Jim sat still, eyes fixed on the moving lights. He felt no fear, only a deep curiosity and a calm that came from years of quiet nights spent observing the world. The lights moved slowly, silently, tracing a path southward toward the Arizona border. He reached for his radio but hesitated. Who would believe such a story? Instead, he simply watched as the lights drifted out of sight, swallowed by the dark horizon. Far below the sky, the desert stretched out in quiet vastness. Between Nevada and Arizona, there were few signs of life, Only mesas, scrub brush, and empty roads. The land was open and waiting, the perfect stage for something unknown to pass unnoticed. The air was dry and still, carrying the faint scent of creosote and sage. In this space, the lights seemed almost dreamlike, gliding slowly and steadily, tracing a path across the night. As the formation crossed the state line, it caught the attention of another observer. In the small town of Paulden, Arizona, a man named Robert was stepping outside his home for a breath of cool night air. The sky above was a deep indigo, sprinkled thick with stars that sparkled like diamonds. Robert noticed a faint glow far to the northwest, growing brighter as it neared. When the lights came into full view, his breath caught at the sight. The formation was unmistakable. A vast triangle of lights, 5 points glowing with soft, warm hues. 4 larger lights marked the corners, with a smaller one nestled near the center. The shape was immense, larger than anything Robert had ever seen in the sky. It moved slowly, with no sound, no flicker, no sign of engines or propulsion. Robert grabbed his binoculars and raised them to his eyes, tracking the mysterious craft as it passed overhead. The cool night air was still, the silence deep and complete. A sense of wonder washed over him, tempered by a quiet disbelief. He called his neighbor, who quickly joined him outside, eyes wide as they both watched the silent shape drift eastward.
"It's as big as a football field, maybe bigger,"
Robert said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. His neighbor nodded, equally awestruck, but unable to explain what they had seen. The triangular formation continued its slow glide, now following the path of Route 17. Along the way, more witnesses caught glimpses of the strange lights. A family driving home from an evening out paused, stepping from their car to look upward. A man walking his dog stopped mid-step, eyes fixed on the glowing shapes above. Each described the same strange silence, the same smooth, deliberate movement. The lights did not blink or flash. Instead, they pulsed gently, as if breathing with the night itself. Some thought to call the authorities, but hesitation held them back. How could they explain a silent, slow-moving craft, so unlike any airplane or helicopter? There was no sense of alarm, only quiet fascination, mixed with a hint of uncertainty. The sky remained clear and calm, offering perfect visibility for the strange procession overhead. As the lights approached Prescott Valley, the number of observers grew. Word spread quietly from neighbor to neighbor. More eyes turned skyward, drawn by the silent spectacle. Still, the mood remained calm, even peaceful. The desert night wrapped around the witnesses like a soft blanket, muffling the world beneath the stars. The lights continued their passage, slow and steady, their origin and destination unknown. What began as a distant glimmer had now become something else entirely, silent, deliberate, and seen by many.
If you found this video helpful or interesting, go ahead and click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll always stay updated with our latest content. We truly appreciate your support.
March 13, 1997. A sky transformed. The sun had long since vanished behind the distant mountains, leaving the sky a deep velvet blue, vast and endless. The stars now shone with crystalline clarity, scattered thickly across the heavens like tiny jewels cast upon a dark tapestry. The desert, sprawling and still, seemed to hold its breath beneath this great celestial dome. In cities and towns across Arizona, the night wrapped itself gently around the land, drawing a hush over streets, fields, and open spaces alike. In Prescott, families sat quietly on porches and balconies, their eyes slowly drifting upward to the night sky. Children, already sleepy, pointed at the familiar constellations, while parents watched with calm smiles, sharing in the peaceful evening. Somewhere in Dewey, a lone figure leaned against a wooden fence, gazing into the vast darkness, as if searching for something just beyond the edge of sight. And then, as if summoned by some secret call, the sky began to change. A vast shape moved silently overhead, its presence commanding without a sound. It was immense, far larger than any airplane or helicopter. Its dark, triangular form stretched across the night, blotting out stars and casting a subtle shadow upon the earth below. Along the underside, a string of soft yellow-orange lights glowed steadily, spaced evenly, like lanterns hung carefully along a great ship's keel. The object drifted slowly, deliberately, as though moving to a rhythm only it could hear. Its edges blended seamlessly into the night, making it seem as if the stars themselves had shifted to reveal a shadow gliding gently through the heavens. Across the cities and desert towns, witnesses paused in their activities. A couple walking their dog in Prescott stopped mid-step, heads tipped back to catch sight of the silent visitor. Children playing in a Phoenix backyard fell quiet, mesmerized by the vast craft above. Even pilots flying overhead remarked on the strange, soundless presence moving beneath the stars. Despite its colossal size, covering city blocks perhaps as long as several football fields, the craft made no noise. No engine hummed, no rotor whirred. Only silence, vast and profound, wrapped the night in a stillness unlike any other. The emotions among those watching were gentle and varied. Wonder, disbelief, awe. There was no panic, no fear. Instead, a shared sense of calm. Time seemed to slow beneath the craft's passage. Minutes stretched and folded, the world hushed in reverence. City noises dimmed, distant traffic faded to a murmur. The stars continued to sparkle, but the sky was no longer empty. It was a stage, illuminated by this extraordinary presence. As the shape moved steadily southward, more people joined in the silent vigil. Families gathered near windows. Strangers stepped out of shops and restaurants. All eyes lifted skyward to the same majestic vision. The craft's lights pulsed softly, breathing with the night's rhythm, steady and unblinking. The desert's stillness deepened, and the sky seemed to hold a secret just beyond the grasp of understanding. Beneath the vast canopy of stars, the silent traveler carved a slow path across the heavens, changing the night forever. And yet, as immense as it was, the craft moved with such gentle grace that it felt less like an invasion and more like a quiet visit. A whisper from the unknown, soft enough to lull the world into wonder. The night stretched onward, timeless and profound. The sky had transformed into a canvas painted by light and shadow, mystery and calm. The watchers stood together and apart, their hearts quietly stirred by the silent visitor above. No one spoke aloud. There was no need. The night had become a shared moment, a gentle secret between the stars and those who dared to look up and wonder. The sky was forever changed that night, no longer just an empty expanse, but a place where the unknown had briefly revealed itself in a calm, silent dance. And the night was far from over.
If you found this video helpful or interesting, go ahead and click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll always stay updated with our latest content. We truly appreciate your support.
Over Phoenix, the city watches. Evening settled softly over Phoenix, the sprawling desert city beginning to glow with thousands of tiny lights. Street lamps flickered on one by one, casting gentle pools of amber on quiet sidewalks. The heat of the day gave way to a cooler breeze, carrying the faint scent of desert blooms and warm asphalt. It was a time when families finished their dinners, neighbors stepped onto porches, and children lingered outside just a moment longer, reluctant to leave the fading light behind. In suburban neighborhoods, a hush fell as people paused to look upward. The sky, a deep indigo canvas sprinkled with stars, held their attention like a silent invitation. From quiet backyards and street corners, eyes lifted to where something unusual had begun to glide slowly above. A family gathered on a porch, the soft murmur of conversation fading as they watched. The father's arm rested gently around his wife's shoulders, while their two children pointed excitedly to the glowing shapes moving overhead. The lights were steady, soft yellow-orange orbs that traced the outline of a massive triangular craft. The edges of the vessel blurred into the night sky, almost invisible except for the string of lights that pulsed faintly beneath. Nearby, a police officer on patrol slowed his cruiser, hands resting lightly on the wheel as he gazed upward. The usual noises of the city, the hum of traffic, the distant bark of dogs, seemed to soften, swallowed by the profound silence that accompanied the craft's passage. He noted the size of the object, stretching across several blocks, larger than anything he had ever encountered. In the skies above, pilots flying routine evening routes adjusted their course, their eyes scanning the instruments and then the horizon. Some spotted the strange formation on radar. Others caught glimpses of the enormous, silent shadow drifting beneath the stars. Yet despite its size and proximity, the craft made no sound, not even the faintest whir or drone. Elsewhere, those driving home slowed their cars, pulling to the side of the road or stopping at intersections to look skyward. Walkers on quiet streets stopped mid-step, heads tilted back in quiet wonder. The city seemed to collectively pause, bound together by this shared unspoken moment beneath the vast desert sky. The craft's lights remained steady, spaced evenly along its underside like glowing lanterns suspended in the night. The shape was unmistakable, a boomerang or triangle, immense and graceful, moving with deliberate slowness. The stars behind it flickered softly, their light dimmed by the shadow it cast. Despite the presence of thousands beneath it, the night was perfectly still. The city's usual clamor faded into a hushed reverence. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath, brushing gently against skin with a cool, calming touch. It was as if time itself had slowed, the world wrapped in a gentle cocoon of silence and light. Whispers passed quietly from one watcher to another, words filled with awe and disbelief rather than fear. "What is that?" a child murmured. "I don't know," a parent replied softly. "But it's beautiful." Minutes stretched, each one seeming to last longer than the last. The craft drifted, slowly, lingering above the city with a steady, peaceful presence. It was enormous, its size measured in familiar terms, as long as several football fields, as wide as a city block. Yet it moved without disturbance, without sound, almost as if it were part of the night itself. As the lights continued their silent journey, the city remained captivated. The watchers felt connected, strangers sharing a rare and extraordinary experience. The glow of the craft painted the sky with a gentle light, the soft pulses like a heartbeat echoing through the still air. And then, as the craft began to move beyond the city limits, the lights dimmed slowly, fading into the darkness like a candle being gently extinguished. The city held its breath for a moment longer, reluctant to let go of the vision above. What had passed over Phoenix was a secret shared by thousands, silent, mysterious, and beautiful. The sky had opened a door to the unknown, if only for a brief time, and those who looked up had been touched by its quiet wonder. The night resumed its usual rhythm, the city lights brightening once more, the sounds of life returning slowly to the streets. But the memory lingered, a gentle echo beneath the stars, a reminder that sometimes the universe reveals itself in the softest, most unexpected ways.
If you found this video helpful or interesting, go ahead and click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll always stay updated with our latest content. We truly appreciate your support.
Luke Air Force Base and the silence. Not far from the glowing cityscape of Phoenix, nestled into the vast Sonoran Desert, Luke Air Force Base stood as a silent sentinel beneath the endless night sky. By day, it was a bustling hub of jets, pilots, and personnel, its runways alive with the roar of engines and the steady rhythm of military precision. But as darkness fell, the base softened into a quieter place, where shadows stretched long over hangars, and radar dishes turned skyward, scanning the heavens in vigilant watch. On this particular evening, the base pulsed with a low hum of activity. In the control towers, radar operators sat before glowing screens, their eyes sharp and attentive. The radar blips flickered steadily across the monitors, mostly known aircraft, routine flights, and the occasional weather balloon. Yet, beneath this routine, an undercurrent of quiet tension grew, subtle and unspoken. Now, outside, the desert wind swept gently across the landscape, carrying with it the cool, dry scent of creosote bushes and warm sand. The stars glittered, cold and distant. A canopy of ancient light stretched across the heavens. But beneath this calm exterior, something was stirring. Something the base personnel could feel even if they could not yet fully explain it. As word of the mysterious lights spread across Arizona, reports began trickling into military communication channels. Civilians described slow-moving, silent objects with glowing lights hovering and gliding in formations, too large and strange to be conventional aircraft. Yet, within Luke Air Force Base, the response was measured and deliberate, a silence that spoke louder than words. No jets were scrambled that night. No urgent orders were given. The radars, reliable and finely tuned, did not register any objects matching the eyewitness descriptions. The craft observed by thousands across the desert and city seemed to evade detection entirely. This contradiction between the public's experience and the official records sent ripples through the base, but nothing official was acknowledged. Inside the break rooms and quiet offices, conversations drifted into hushed whispers. Some personnel gathered in small groups, sharing stories and theories. Their voices were low, respectful, tinged with curiosity and a hint of unease. Was this a known aircraft? A secret test? Or something else entirely? The lack of any clear explanation only deepened the mystery. One radar technician, a young woman named Maria, leaned back in her chair, eyes still fixed on the dark screen before her. She had seen unusual blips during her years on duty, but nothing like this. Something didn't add up. She glanced toward the window where the night sky stretched endlessly, wondering if the glowing lights people spoke of were out there right now, slipping through the shadows. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the base, a seasoned pilot named Captain Reynolds flipped through his flight log with distracted fingers. He had heard the reports too, friends talking late into the night about the glowing boomerang shape over Phoenix. He thought back to his own training, the countless hours spent scanning skies for threats, for anything unusual. But this was different. There was no threat, only silence, only awe. The contrast between the official calm and the civilians' astonishment was striking. The people below saw a grand, silent craft moving slowly over their homes, their cars, their neighborhoods. Yet those sworn to protect the airspace acted as if nothing was amiss. The silence from the base created an invisible barrier between two realities, both observing the same sky, but experiencing vastly different stories. Outside the gates of Luke Air Force Base, the desert held its quiet vigil. The night stretched wide, filled with shadows and stars. The scent of the earth was strong in the cool air, mingled with the distant sound of coyotes and the rustle of mesquite leaves. The desert seemed to listen, to hold its breath along with the people watching the sky. The absence of sound from the mysterious craft was matched only by the profound stillness that settled over the base itself. It was as if the night had absorbed a secret, one that no radio transmission could carry, no official statement could reveal. The silence became a presence, a heavy, waiting thing that wrapped around the desert, the city, and the base alike. And in that silence, questions lingered like stars, unanswered, distant, yet shining steadily. What had passed unseen on radar? What were those lights drifting silently above, defying detection and explanation? The silence from Luke Air Force Base was a silence full of meaning. It spoke of mysteries held close, of stories unspoken, of a night when the skies themselves became a realm of wonder and quiet astonishment. As the hours passed, the base returned to its routine, the radar screens steady once more, the jets resting in their hangars. But the quiet tension remained, a subtle pulse beneath the surface of calm. Outside, the desert night carried on, deep and endless. The stars kept watch, timeless and indifferent, and the sky, vast and secret, held its mysteries close, waiting for the next moment when silence would speak again.
If you found this video helpful or interesting, go ahead and click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll always stay updated with our latest content. We truly appreciate your support.
Lights beyond. From Tucson to the state border. As the vast, silent craft passed beyond Phoenix, the desert opened wide ahead of it, dark and undisturbed. The sky above was now fully in its midnight phase, stars sharp and motionless, constellations sprawling in their ancient geometry. Beneath this starlit dome, the mysterious lights continued drifting southward, steady, unwavering, as though following a path mapped long ago. Far beyond the city, the land grew quieter. The desert here was older, lonelier. The wind stirred only occasionally, brushing across the crests of dry hills and sending grains of sand whispering along the road's edge. Jackrabbits paused in moonlit clearings, Coyotes tilted their ears to the sky, listening. There was no sound, only the low hum of life at rest and the occasional creak of mesquite trees under the cool weight of night. In Tucson, nearly 2 hours to the south, the city rested beneath the same watchful stars. Most had already turned in for the night. Houses glowed faintly from within, TVs murmured in bedrooms, porch lights flickered across quiet cul-de-sacs. The city, surrounded by mountains and desert, was a place used to unusual beauty in the night sky. But what was about to drift overhead was unlike anything the residents had ever known. A university student named Laura sat by her dormitory window on the top floor, a physics textbook resting closed beside her. She gazed outside, her attention lost in the stillness of the night. It was then that she noticed them. Lights. Faint at first, then clearer. 5, maybe 6. Arranged in a clean V formation, they moved slowly and without sound over the northern hills. She opened the window. The breeze was soft, almost cool now, brushing against her face. No engines, no whirring blades, just light. She leaned forward, heart beginning to race, not from fear, but from awe. She had studied flight mechanics and orbital systems, but this followed no logic. The object was too large, too low, and far too quiet. Elsewhere in Tucson, a family walked slowly through the desert just outside the city, as they often did after dinner when the heat had faded. The stars above glimmered in familiar constellations, Orion above the saguaro, the Big Dipper tilted westward. Then, one of the children pointed upward. There it was again, the same shape, dark against the stars, its outline barely visible except for the soft amber glow of its lights. The craft passed directly overhead, vast and quiet, coasting as if it weighed nothing at all. The parents stopped walking. No one spoke. For a moment, time held still, as if the desert itself paused to take notice. At the far edge of town, a group of amateur astronomers stood outside their vehicles near a wide open plain. Telescopes pointed upward, their tripods steady on the sandy soil. They'd come to observe Jupiter's moons, maybe catch a meteor or two. But when the first of them noticed the strange lights approaching from the north, their attention shifted in unison. No one reached for their phones. No one said a word. They simply watched. The craft moved slowly, but it covered the sky like a dark sail unfurling. One of the observers later wrote in his journal that it felt like the sky was folding in on itself, like a curtain drawn quietly across the stars. The object passed above them in total silence, heading further south, and gradually faded from view. But the journey did not end there. South of Tucson, across long stretches of empty highway and desert plains, the lights were seen again, near Green Valley, over the Rincon Mountains, and down toward the remote roads near Sierra Vista. On a quiet ranch near the town of Douglas, a man named Enrique sat on the porch of his small adobe home, sipping coffee. He had seen satellites before, weather balloons, distant planes tracing paths toward Mexico. But this was different. He watched it glide overhead, huge, triangular, utterly noiseless. The cattle in the field did not stir. The dog at his feet raised its head, ears perked, then laid it back down again, unbothered. The object moved as if it belonged there, as if it had always belonged there. And farther still, near the Arizona-Mexico border, the lights appeared one last time. A trucker parked at a rest stop stood outside his cab, hands in his pockets, watching the sky. He'd been driving all night, had seen everything from dust storms to meteor showers, but this was no meteor, and it wasn't lightning or military flares. The triangle passed overhead, large and deliberate, its lights like low-burning coals set into the night. All along the desert's edge, witnesses watched quietly, not with alarm, but with stillness. No one ran, no one shouted. They simply looked up, wondering what it was they were truly seeing. There were no sonic booms, no flashes, no disruptions, just presence, vast, slow, and inexplicable. The farther south the craft drifted, the more the landscape opened into deep stillness. It was as if the world beneath it became more ancient, more receptive. The cactus-strewn hills and forgotten ravines seemed to remember something that others had forgotten, that not all visitors make noise, and not all stories come with answers. Eventually, the lights disappeared, faded slowly, like embers dying out. The craft, if that's what it was, vanished into the night, leaving only the sky behind. But something had changed. Those who saw it would never look at the stars the same way again. Arizona, and the desert, as it always had, kept its silence.
If you found this video helpful or interesting, go ahead and click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll always stay updated with our latest content. We truly appreciate your support.
The official story, flares and explanations. Morning came gently to Arizona. The same skies that had held strange lights just hours before now stretched wide and blue and bright above the desert landscape. Sunlight spilled across rooftops and mountainsides, filling the quiet towns and bustling cities with warmth once again. Birds called softly from mesquite branches, and a dry breeze moved through the cactus and gravel in slow, sweeping breaths. But beneath the gentle rhythm of a new day, something different lingered, something quiet and shared. It wasn't fear, it wasn't excitement, it was something softer, a feeling of wonder, of remembering. Across Phoenix, Tucson, and the smaller desert towns in between, people rose from their beds thinking about what they had seen the night before. In kitchens and coffee shops, on porches and sidewalks, they spoke in low tones, carefully recounting what they remembered. Not to exaggerate, not to speculate, but simply to share. "I saw it too," one woman said to her neighbor, their voices hushed over a backyard fence. "My kids couldn't stop watching it," said a man at a diner counter. "We pulled over on the highway and just stared." "It didn't make a sound," whispered a trucker to his waitress, his cup steaming in the early light. There were no dramatic headlines, no breaking news, but the story began to spread. Radio stations opened their phone lines to callers. One by one, people described the same thing, 5 or 6 lights, fixed in a perfect triangle or boomerang shape, floating silently overhead. They weren't erratic, they didn't flash or buzz. They moved slowly, like a great ship coasting through the stars. Witnesses described the craft as massive, larger than anything they'd ever seen in the sky, and always the same refrain: no sound, no wind, just movement, just presence. As the days passed, the quiet murmuring became more steady. Local news stations began to take notice. Some ran short interviews, others played tapes of callers describing the event. A few tried to match the reports with conventional explanations: military exercises, aircraft formations, weather anomalies. But the more people shared, the more unusual the event seemed. And then, an answer came. A few days after the sightings, officials at Luke Air Force Base released a statement. They confirmed that on the evening of March 13th, a squadron of A-10 Warthog jets had been flying a routine training mission over the Barry M. Goldwater Range, southwest of Phoenix. As part of that exercise, flares were dropped from high altitude. These flares, suspended by parachutes, would have glowed brightly as they descended, drifting slowly in the night. It was, they said, most likely what people had seen. The explanation was neat. It was official. It was ordinary. And for some, it was enough. There were those who accepted the answer without question. Flares, after all, could look strange at night, especially to the untrained eye. They floated, they flickered. Their light could seem otherworldly in the still desert air. Some witnesses nodded and moved on. Not everything needed to be mysterious. But others were not so sure. They thought back to the shape, the precision of the lights, the even spacing, the solid darkness between the points. They remembered how long the craft lingered above them. Not seconds, but minutes. Some said it took 10, even 15 minutes to pass overhead. Flares would have flickered and faded. These lights were steady, controlled. Flares would have descended. These lights moved level across the sky. And most of all, the silence. Military flares were dropped from jets. Jets made noise, tremendous noise. Yet what passed over Arizona that night made none at all. Not even a hum. Not even a whisper. The official story said one thing. The sky had seemed to say something else. Still, there was no anger, no confrontation. No one demanded answers with raised voices. Instead, there was only a kind of quiet detachment, a gentle disconnect between what had been seen and what had been said, a feeling that perhaps something had slipped through, something larger than what the radar caught, something that the explanations couldn't quite touch. And that was enough, because the memory of the event, the experience of standing under the stars and watching that silent shape pass overhead, was not something that needed permission to exist. It had already taken root in the minds of those who had seen it. It had already settled into the rhythm of desert stories, passed from one evening to another in the soft hush of twilight conversations. The sky had spoken in silence. The explanation had come in words, and between the two, a mystery remained. In the weeks and months that followed, the story faded from the headlines, but it didn't disappear. It lingered, gently, persistently, like a whisper on the breeze. A moment shared by thousands, retold quietly in the glow of porch lights and under starlit skies. A part of Arizona now, woven into its long history of unexplained wonders and desert dreams. The sky above returned to its usual stillness. The stars shone with familiar light. But for those who had looked up on the night of March 13th, 1997, the silence overhead was no longer just empty air. It was a memory, a question, a presence.
If you found this video helpful or interesting, go ahead and click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll always stay updated with our latest content. We truly appreciate your support.
Eyewitnesses remember the human stories. Time passed. The desert moved through its quiet seasons. Monsoon storms sweeping across the plains. Summer heat softening into cold, clear nights. The stars still shone at night, sharp and familiar. Phoenix carried on. Tucson carried on. And the long, open highways returned to silence. But for some, the memory of that night never left. What drifted over Arizona left no trace. No wreckage. No sound. It passed like a dream. Brief, vivid, and unforgettable. And while most moved on, there were those who remembered, not because they needed answers, but because something had changed. The lights had vanished, but the memory remained. Robert, a retired teacher in Mesa, recalled that night often. He had been sitting on his porch with a cup of tea, watching stars rise over the desert horizon. He remembered the stillness first. The air felt heavy, almost thoughtful. Then he saw the lights. A V-shape gliding above, silent and immense. The kind of quiet that feels louder than noise. He hadn't taken a picture. He didn't reach for the phone. He simply watched. It was beautiful, he would say years later. Not frightening, just different, peaceful. He still looked at the sky most nights, just in case it returned. In Flagstaff, Elise held a childhood memory. She was 5 years old in 1997, sitting in the back seat as her parents drove home after dinner with family. It was a quiet road. The windows were down. She saw the lights first, gliding slowly overhead. Her parents stopped the car. They all stepped out and stood there, listening to the silence. It felt like the world paused, she said. No one talked. We just watched. She never forgot that moment. Years later, Elise became an astronomer. She said it wasn't because of that night, at least not directly. But she'd never looked at the sky the same way. Since then, the stars always seemed to carry something just out of reach, a quiet question. Daniel, a former police officer from Casa Grande, remembered it too. He'd been patrolling a rural road when he noticed cars pulled over. Curious, he parked and got out. People stood by the roadside staring upward, and then he saw it. Huge, triangular, floating silently overhead. No one spoke. There were no sirens, no radios, just a strange reverence. He didn't report it, didn't write it up. He just stood there with the others. I didn't feel fear, he recalled. I felt like I was supposed to see it, like we all were. Even now, decades later, that moment stayed with him. Not like a mystery, but like a story you carry because it means something. Stories like these were never loud. They weren't told in shouting or in headlines. They surfaced in quiet moments, on back porches, at coffee counters, or whispered across campfires. Some were never shared at all, just written down in private journals, then folded away. Most who saw the lights didn't claim to know what they were. Some accepted the flare explanation, others didn't, but almost all of them remembered the feeling. Stillness, scale, peace. For many, it wasn't about what they saw, it was how it made them feel. Something massive and silent had passed overhead, slow, calm, and unknowable. And in that moment, something ancient stirred inside them, a kind of awe that didn't need to be solved. Some said the sky felt closer that night. Others felt smaller and strangely comforted. They weren't looking for proof, just presence. Even now, the desert remembers in silence. The stars remember in stillness. And the people who looked up on that strange March night still carry it quietly inside them. A flicker of wonder that has never left. A memory lit not by answers, but by the simple act of seeing. Something had passed over them. And somehow, that was enough.
If you found this video helpful or interesting, go ahead and click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll always stay updated with our latest content. We truly appreciate your support.
Echoes through time, the Phoenix Lights legacy. Time moves forward gently and without hurry, as it always does. Years have passed since that quiet night in March 1997, when the skies over Arizona held their breath and the Phoenix Lights drifted silently across the stars. The desert continued to stretch wide beneath the endless heavens, the roads stretched onward, and the seasons folded one into another. Summer into fall, fall into winter, winter into spring. But the memory of that night did not fade. Instead, it settled softly into the fabric of the land, like the gentle footprint of a whisper carried on the wind. The lights themselves became more than just an event. They became a quiet legend, a peaceful mystery woven into the heart of the desert. In towns and cities, people remembered. They told stories in low voices, not to seek answers, but to share a moment of wonder. The Phoenix Lights were no longer just lights in the sky. They were a symbol of awe, of curiosity, and of the unknown touching the known. Artists found inspiration in that silence. Writers painted the sky with words, drawing pictures of vast triangular ships and slow, glowing orbs moving without sound or haste. Musicians composed melodies that seemed to echo the gentle drifting of the lights. Films and documentaries began to appear, inviting others to experience the calm mystery of that night. Communities gathered on anniversaries, not in fear or urgency, but in quiet remembrance. Families and strangers alike would come together beneath the stars, sharing their stories and watching the skies in hopeful stillness. These gatherings were gentle celebrations of wonder, a collective breath held in peaceful curiosity. Even those far from Arizona felt the pull of the story. The Phoenix Lights transcended place and time, becoming part of a wider conversation about the mysteries that lie just beyond our reach. They reminded people everywhere to look up, to pause, and to remember that not all answers need to be found. Some mysteries exist simply to be seen. Scientists and skeptics, too, have studied the event. Various theories have been proposed. Military training flares, experimental aircraft, atmospheric phenomena. These explanations offer pieces of understanding, yet none seem to fully capture the calm grandeur and silence that so many witnessed. The debate is quiet and ongoing, never loud or harsh, a gentle hum beneath the more poetic memories. Perhaps that is the true legacy of the Phoenix Lights. Their quiet power to inspire wonder without demanding proof. They invite us all to embrace the unknown, to cherish the silent moments under the night sky, and to find peace in the questions that have no immediate answers. The lights remind us that the universe is vast, that our place within it is small, but filled with possibility. They encourage us to dream, to imagine, and to keep our eyes turned upwards. So, as you listen now, beneath your own sky, know that the Phoenix Lights live on, not just in stories or footage, but in the soft, lingering echo of a night when the stars seemed to open just a little wider. A night when silence spoke. A night when wonder drifted softly over the desert. A night that will always be waiting in the quiet spaces between the stars. If you're still awake, you're in for something a little different now. Here are some eerie, lesser-known UFO encounters from around the world. Strange events, quiet sightings, and unsettling moments reported by ordinary people. Tales that never made the headlines, but left deep impressions on those who lived them. You're safe here. Just listen and drift as the mysteries unfold. Story 10. The Passenger in Seat 33A. Over the Pacific, 1997. In December of 1997, Flight 815, a commercial red-eye traveling from Tokyo to Los Angeles, was halfway over the Pacific when the cabin lights dimmed for the night. Most passengers were asleep. Outside, the world was nothing but clouds and black ocean. Seat 33A was a window seat near the rear of the aircraft. A man named Daniel Pierce sat there, returning from a business trip, unable to sleep. He was reading a dog-eared paperback when he noticed something strange outside the window. A light. But it wasn't a star. It was closer. Far too close. It moved alongside the plane, perfectly matched in speed. A glowing sphere, dull orange in color, like heated metal. It pulsed gently, not blinking, but breathing. And as Daniel stared, he realized it wasn't the only one. 3 more appeared. In formation, triangular, silent. They flew just below the wing level, far too close for another aircraft. But there was no turbulence, no sound, no alarm. The cabin remained quiet. Then came the hum. Low, deep, like it came from within his own chest. He looked around. No one else stirred. Not the flight attendants, not the other passengers. It was as if time had slowed. The lights outside the window began to shift, not in shape but in color. Soft gradients of red and violet, impossible to describe. And then between the lights he saw it. A figure. Just for a moment. It was seated beside him. Tall, unmoving, expressionless. Its skin was smooth and pale, and its eyes, if they were eyes, reflected no light. It didn't turn to him. It didn't speak. But Daniel felt a word enter his mind anyway, clear as if whispered in his ear. Observe. He blinked, and everything was back. Cabin lights, snoring passengers, flight attendants moving through the aisle. The lights outside were gone. Daniel reached for his book, but it was closed, with a bookmark tucked into a page he hadn't reached yet. When the plane landed, he didn't speak to anyone. But later, while checking his seat number on the boarding stub, he noticed something odd. Flight 815 had no seat 33A. The row ended at 32. There was no record of his seat ever existing. He never flew again, and sometimes, even years later, he'd wake in the middle of the night with a pressure in his ears and a soft word still echoing in his head. Observe. Story 11. The Moonlit House, Argentina, 1989. In the quiet hills of Córdoba province, Argentina, where dirt roads wind through tall grass and power lines fade into the horizon, there once stood a house at the edge of an empty field. It had belonged to the Velasco family for generations, a modest farmhouse with a red tin roof and an old windmill that creaked in the breeze. By 1989, only Rosa Velasco remained. A retired schoolteacher in her 70s, she lived simply, keeping a garden, a few chickens, and her black dog Mateo. She felt safe in her solitude. Until one night in early spring. It began with a sound, not loud, but sharp, like static from an old radio. Rosa was in bed, drifting off, when she heard it. She sat up and Mateo growled from the foot of the bed. Outside, the moon was nearly full. She pulled back the curtain and saw lights, flickering orbs just above the field. Not lanterns, not headlights. They moved with strange, fluid precision, gliding, weaving, as if searching. She opened the back door quietly. Then she noticed something else. Her garden was glowing. A bluish light rose from the soil, casting long, odd shadows across the fence. The air felt heavy, like the moment before lightning. Then she saw them. 2 figures, thin, taller than men, their skin pale, grey-blue like polished stone. They stood beyond the vegetables, perfectly still. Rosa froze. Mateo didn't bark. He only whimpered, low and frightened. The figures said nothing, but Rosa felt something. A thought, maybe. A memory that wasn't hers. A street she'd never seen. A voice she didn't recognize. Then the windmill stopped turning. The orbs blinked out, one by one. The figures turned, moving in unison, and walked into the tall grass. The light faded. The air returned. The next morning, everything seemed normal, except for one vine that had grown over 1 meter overnight. Its tomato was warm to the touch, ripe beyond reason. She told no one. Years later, neighbors spoke of strange lights near the property. Some heard static by the windmill, and long after Rosa passed, the house was found with its door wide open, no sign of damage or theft, just one overripe tomato sitting on the kitchen table, still warm. Story 12. The Lost Time of Dr. Ilari, Finland, 1974. In the winter of 1974, Dr. Simo Ilari, a physicist from Helsinki, traveled north for a solo retreat. He rented a cabin near Lake Inari, deep in Lapland's snow-covered wilderness. The cabin had no electricity, just a fireplace, a kerosene lamp, and a radio for weather reports. Ilari wasn't there to rest. He brought notebooks, hoping the isolation would help him concentrate. Each day, he hiked the frozen lake's edge. Each night, he worked beside the fire. On the 6th evening, just after dusk, a strange hum began. It didn't come from the radio. It vibrated through the floor, through the walls, low, steady, almost musical. He stepped outside, expecting a snowmobile in the distance, but there was only silence. Then he saw it. Hovering high above the frozen lake was a pale disk of light. Not spinning, not blinking. It floated motionless, its glow soft and cold. The light didn't cast shadows. It shimmered on the snow like moonlight beneath water. Then, the hum stopped. No wind, no sound. Even the cold seemed distant, suspended. Ilari looked at his watch, a mechanical one he wound every night. The second hand had frozen. The disc tilted slightly, then pulsed with a single flash of white light. He blinked, and it was morning. The fire had gone out. His tea kettle was cold. 2 days had passed. The date on his calendar had moved forward, but he remembered nothing. His boots were wet as if he'd been walking through snow. His journal was open to a new page, one he hadn't written. Curved symbols stretched across the paper in neat rows. At the bottom, a small circle divided by a wave. Ilari left that same day. He never spoke publicly about what happened, but colleagues noticed something shift. He abandoned his research in theoretical physics, turned instead to sound, to resonance. In letters, he mentioned a theory he called harmonic displacement. No one ever understood it. He died in 1993. The cabin was sold. The journal was still on the shelf. The strange page remained. Years later, a local skier claimed to see a dull ring of light hovering above the lake. He said it made no sound, but when he looked at his watch, 5 minutes had disappeared. Story 13. The Lights Beneath Loch Morar, Scotland, 2001. Loch Morar is one of the deepest bodies of fresh water in Europe, cold, dark, and largely untouched. Tucked into the western highlands of Scotland, it's a place of fog and stone, where the hills fall steep into the loch's glassy surface. Legends of a monster called Morag have lingered for centuries, but in 2001, something even stranger may have stirred beneath the water. Duncan Fraser, a forestry worker from Fort William, spent most of his time maintaining trails on the loch's northern shore. That summer, he was given a week-long contract to repair fencing along the eastern bank, where access was limited and the woods grew dense. He brought a small tent, a gas stove, and a camera he used to photograph wildlife and landscapes. His second night by the loch was still, with a crescent moon rising. Duncan sat by his campfire near the water's edge, sipping tea, when he noticed a pale glow just beneath the surface of the loch. At first, he assumed it was moonlight, but it moved, slowly, against the direction of the current. Then it split into 2 lights, both round, both dim, and they began to rotate around one another, like twin stars caught in orbit. He stood, camera in hand, and walked closer. The lights descended deeper into the water, then rose again. Closer now, still beneath the surface, but casting a faint shimmer on the rocks at his feet. They were silent. The loch remained perfectly still. No waves, no splashes. Suddenly, a third light appeared, brighter, more concentrated, and shaped not like a ball, but a beam, pointing directly upward. Duncan stepped back. He described the sensation as a pressure in the air, as though the atmosphere itself had thickened. He didn't feel fear, only awe, and a deep-rooted instinct not to move. The lights began to rise. Still beneath the water, but faster now. Then they blinked out all at once, and the loch went black. The next morning he found no sign of disturbance, but the photos on his camera, every one taken that night, were completely blank. Not corrupted, just pure white frames, as if exposed to direct light. The images before and after were unaffected. 2 days later, Duncan reported the incident to a local ranger. He didn't mention aliens, Just lights, movement, and something not normal. The ranger listened silently. When Duncan finished, the man only said,
"People forget how deep this loch really goes."
In the years that followed, others began reporting strange sights on the eastern bank, small lights under the water, fish found stunned but unharmed, and one diver, an experienced military-trained freediver, claimed to hear a low-frequency hum at 200 feet, like an engine buried in rock. No structures have ever been found at the bottom of Loch Morar, but the lights still return some nights, spinning, waiting, just beneath the surface, where nothing is supposed to shine. Story 14. The Transmission Tower, Montana, 1962. In 1962, deep in the snowy hills outside Great Falls, Montana, a small government communications site stood alone on a ridge. It was known simply as Tower 7, a steel radio tower with a low cinder block building at its base. Staffed by 2 men per shift, its purpose was basic: relay microwave signals between military installations. Most nights were uneventful. That winter, James Delaney, a quiet man with a background in electronics, worked the midnight shift alone. His partner had been reassigned unexpectedly, and until a replacement arrived, James maintained the equipment solo. It was on his 3rd night alone that things changed. Around 2:15 a.m., a low tone began to seep through the building's receiver. Not interference, not static, a precise, steady frequency. James checked the readouts. Nothing unusual. The tone didn't match any active channels, and when he tried to isolate it, the entire console dimmed. Then the tower lights flickered. He stepped outside into the freezing wind. The air was perfectly still. No storm, no clouds. But above the ridge, perhaps 30 feet above the tower's tip, hovered a dull, matte black object. It was disc-shaped, featureless, and completely silent. James stood motionless. The object remained perfectly still for nearly 2 minutes. Then, from its underside, a beam of red light extended, not onto the ground, but across the air, connecting directly to the top of the tower. And then the tone returned. Louder now, not from the equipment, but from the object itself. It vibrated in the metal around him, in the soil, in his chest. Then the light snapped off. The disc tilted slowly, turned without sound, and disappeared into the night sky in a smooth, horizontal blur. No arc, no trail, just gone. James returned inside. The equipment was dead. The backup systems wouldn't engage. And when technicians arrived the next day, they found every recording tape from the previous 12 hours completely blank. He filed a standard report, omitting the object. But several nights later, a different technician, unaware of James's experience, refused to return after his shift. He'd heard a tone, he said, and felt like something was watching from above. By spring, Tower 7 was quietly shut down. The structure still stands, rusting in the wind, cables cut. Locals avoid the ridge, saying the air there feels wrong, and some still report seeing a faint red line stretching through the cold sky, far above where the signal ever should have gone. Story 15. The Floating Girl, Uzbekistan, 1995. In the spring of 1995, A small village outside Samarkand, Uzbekistan, experienced an event that was whispered about for years, but never formally reported. It was a place of quiet farms and wide skies, where children played in the fields and elders watched the world move slowly past. One of those children was a girl named Amina. She was 10 years old, shy, and often wandered the meadows behind her family's home. On a warm afternoon in late April, she was seen walking toward the edge of the fields with her usual notebook and pencil. She liked to draw birds and clouds. That evening, however, she didn't return. The sun had just set when her older brother ran back to the house, pale and out of breath. He'd seen Amina floating. Not lying down, not levitating off the ground in sleep. Floating. Upright, arms at her sides, 10 feet in the air. Motionless. At first, her parents thought it was a trick or a child's panic, but when they and several neighbors hurried to the edge of the field, they saw it too. Amina hovered silently above the grass. Above her, a perfect silver sphere hovered, smooth, metallic, no markings. It made no sound, no light. It simply hung in the air, directly above the girl, as if tethered by some invisible string. One witness later described the scene as too quiet, as if all sound had been drawn away. Amina did not cry, did not move. Her eyes were open, calm, focused on something no one else could see. Then, without warning, the sphere pulsed, just once, and began to rise. Amina followed. She ascended slowly, eyes still fixed on something above. At 20 feet, her body seemed to shimmer. Then, gently, she was lowered back to the ground. As soon as her feet touched the earth, the sphere vanished. No trail, no flash, just empty sky. Amina blinked, looked around, and asked why everyone was staring. She remembered nothing. No sound, no floating, no silver light. Doctors found nothing wrong with her. She lived a long, quiet life and never showed signs of trauma. But for the rest of her days, she claimed she often dreamed of shapes, perfect, glowing spheres, and said she felt most at peace when walking near the edge of the fields under a wide, empty sky. To this day, the locals remember that afternoon. Some say it was a miracle, others, something else. But all agree, nothing that silent should ever come from above.
If you found this video helpful or interesting, go ahead and click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll always stay updated with our latest content. We truly appreciate your support.
Story 16. The Mirror on Route 13. Virginia, 1980. In the fall of 1980, along a quiet stretch of Route 13 in rural Virginia, a strange sight was reported by 2 highway workers just after midnight. It looked like a pane of glass, tall, narrow, standing upright on the side of the road. When they got closer, they realized it was a mirror. Not broken, not leaning. Perfectly vertical, nearly 6 feet tall, without a frame or stand. It reflected only the darkness behind them, but not the headlights. That was the first odd thing. Michael stepped in front of it, but saw no reflection, just the road, continuing endlessly behind him. Not the real one. Another version, one that curved sharply to the right, into a pine grove that didn't exist. They both stared at it. In the mirror, fog rolled across the road's surface. Shapes moved in the distance, tall and thin, walking slowly across the false highway. There were no faces, no lights, just shadows that paused occasionally, as if listening. Leon reached out and touched the surface. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It had no temperature at all. Then the mirror shimmered, only slightly, like heat rising off asphalt. A sharp tone rang out, brief and piercing, like metal scraped across metal. The shapes in the reflection turned, slowly, all at once, as if they had noticed the watchers. Michael stepped back. Leon didn't. He was frozen, staring into the mirror, eyes wide. Then, for just a moment, Michael saw Leon's reflection, not beside him, but deep within the mirrored road, walking into that strange pine grove. Michael grabbed his arm, pulled him away. The mirror vanished, not shattered, not moved, just gone. There was no sound, no flash. The road was empty again. Leon collapsed. When he woke, he remembered nothing, but he never went near Route 13 again. The following week, Michael returned alone. He found no trace of the mirror, but swore he saw a new curve forming in the woods, where no road had ever been. Locals still call it the Phantom Turn. They say if you drive that stretch after midnight, your headlights might catch a tall glass shape just off the shoulder, just for a second. And if you look too long, you might see the road going somewhere it shouldn't. Story 17. The No-Face Watchers, Tasmania, 2010. In the remote highlands of central Tasmania, far from the towns and coastal roads, lies a patch of wilderness known for its steep ridges and thick eucalyptus forests. Hikers rarely venture there. The terrain is rugged, and the trails, when visible, often vanish into undergrowth. In 2010, a pair of researchers, Emily and Theo, were conducting a biodiversity survey in the area. They were camping 2 nights in, cataloging bird calls and plant species for a conservation project. On their 3rd evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, a quiet fell across the valley that neither of them could explain. The usual forest sounds, the insects, the birds, the breeze through the trees, all stopped. The air felt dense, still, and above them, on the ridgeline, 3 figures stood in silence. At first, they thought it was a trio of hikers, but the figures were tall, much taller than normal, and perfectly still. They stood with arms at their sides, facing directly down toward the campsite. Theo called out, but there was no response. They used binoculars to try to get a better look. And that's when Emily whispered, "They don't have faces." In the fading light, they saw what looked like smooth, featureless heads. No eyes, no mouths, just pale, bare skin. Yet the figures never shifted or reacted. They simply watched. For hours, Emily and Theo took turns keeping watch. By midnight, the figures were still there, unchanged. The air felt wrong, compressed. Theo tried to use a satellite phone, but it refused to power on. Then, around 2 a.m., The fire dimmed, not from lack of fuel, but as if the light itself was being absorbed. That's when the sound returned. Not from the forest, but from inside their heads, a low hum, vibrating, internal, as if a pressure was building just behind the eyes. The figures began to move, not walking, sliding, effortlessly down the ridge in a straight line, without stepping, without shifting their posture. Theo grabbed a flare and fired it into the air. The light broke the moment. The figures froze. Then, without warning, they vanished, like fog burned away by sunlight. The next morning, the trees around their camp were scorched in narrow vertical lines as though exposed to sudden heat. Their satellite phone worked again. They left without collecting the rest of their gear. Emily later described the sensation not as fear, but as being seen in a way that reached beneath thought. Neither of them returned to the highlands, and no survey crews have been assigned to that area since. Story 18. The Hushed Farm, Ukraine, 1987. In the rural fields outside Vinnytsia, Ukraine, the Kolvenko family farm had stood since before the war. 3 generations had worked its soil, wheat, sunflowers, and barley swaying under long golden sunsets. It was a quiet life, the kind untouched by politics or cities. But in the autumn of 1987, something changed. It began with silence. One morning, Pavel Kolvenko, the family's eldest son, noticed something strange. No birds, no dogs barking in the distance, no rustling from the wheat stalks in the wind. The farm was wrapped in a thick, unnatural quiet. His father, Mikhail, was in the barn sharpening tools when it happened. The light came first. A pulsing blue glow like moonlight trapped in water poured across the fields from above. It had no source, no craft, no beam, just a presence. It lit the barn rafters and sent the horses into a frozen trance. Mikhail walked outside and stopped. Floating 15 feet above the wheat was an object, oval-shaped, dark at the center, surrounded by slow-turning rings of pale light that shimmered like glass. It didn't move. It didn't hum. It simply existed, utterly silent, like the rest of the world. Then time itself seemed to stretch. Pavel would later say that, standing on the porch, he watched his father's movement slow, as if he were moving through syrup. A drop of sweat paused halfway down his cheek. The wind halted. Dust hung in the air like suspended snow. Inside the house, the clocks stopped ticking. Then came the sound. Not from the sky, but from the ground. A low resonance, deep and tremulous, like the groan of something vast waking beneath the soil. The wheat bent, not with the wind, but outward, away from the object above, as if pushed by invisible hands. And just as suddenly, it ended. The object vanished. The glow disappeared. The birds returned, and all across the house, the clocks ticked forward again. Exactly 3 minutes lost. But Mikhail would never speak again. He lived another 20 years in perfect health, but never uttered a word. He didn't seem frightened, just quiet, peaceful, like someone who'd heard something so final, so vast, there was simply nothing left to say. To this day, the Kolvenko farm grows sunflowers taller than anywhere else in the region. Locals say the soil remembers. even if no one talks about what happened in those 3 missing minutes. Story 19. The Empty Village, Alaska, 1953. In the winter of 1953, a bush pilot named Raymond Cross flew a routine supply drop to a remote fishing village on the western Alaskan coast. The village, Akatuk, was small, home to fewer than 50 people, a close-knit Inuit community that lived simply and stayed isolated by choice. Raymond had been flying there for 5 years. He knew the faces, the dogs, the way smoke curled from chimneys even before his skis touched the ice. But this time something was wrong. There was no smoke, no movement, no sound. He circled twice before landing on the snow-packed inlet. As his plane slowed, he looked toward the village and saw nothing. The houses were still there. The boats lined the shore, but no one came to greet him, not even the dogs. The silence was total. Raymond walked up the main path, calling out. No response. Doors stood open. A stew sat on a fire pit, long gone cold. Clothing hung on lines, frozen in the wind. But there were no people, no footprints in the fresh snow, no signs of struggle, just absence. He found a radio and attempted to call for help, but the signal was garbled. Strange feedback, not static, but rhythmic pulses like sonar or breathing. Inside the schoolhouse, he discovered something stranger still. All the chairs had been moved to the center of the room, arranged in a perfect spiral. On the chalkboard, someone had drawn a circle filled with lines and dots. Nothing in English, nothing he recognized. The chalk had snapped mid-stroke and was still on the floor. Raymond stayed for less than an hour. He flew straight to Nome, filed a report, and returned days later with state authorities. By then, snow had covered most of the village. No bodies were ever found. No sign of evacuation, no tracks leading away. Just a town frozen in mid-life. The government wrote it off as a freak migration event, unstable ice, or an unreported emergency. But Raymond knew better. He'd been there. He'd felt the quiet. In his later years, he spoke about it only once. He said the air had felt watched, like standing on a stage with a curtain just beginning to lift. The village remains abandoned to this day. Some say if you walk its paths after nightfall, you'll hear footsteps that never quite catch up to you. Others say they already have. Story 20. The Tunnel Below Novaya Zemlya, Russia, 1971. In 1971, the Soviet Navy operated a covert listening station on the Arctic island of Novaya Zemlya, far north of the Russian mainland. The island was known for nuclear testing, bitter cold, and long stretches of total darkness in winter. Only military personnel and research teams lived there. That year, engineers began drilling a tunnel beneath the permafrost to expand their underground storage. At first, the work went smoothly. Careful excavation, reinforced steel supports, regular progress reports. Until they reached the chamber. Just past 90 meters, the drill team broke through a wall of ice and into a naturally formed cavity. Smooth, symmetrical, and dry despite the surrounding frost. It wasn't marked on any geological survey. There were no cracks, no signs of erosion. Just a space, roughly spherical, perfectly quiet. The workers paused the operation and a team of geophysicists was sent to investigate. They descended into the chamber with lights, meters, and sensors. One by one, their equipment failed. Not all at once, just irregular. Lights dimmed, batteries drained. The air inside remained breathable, but unnaturally still, as if even sound resisted moving. At the center of the chamber was a stone platform, unremarkable but wrong somehow. Smooth, rectangular, warm to the touch. One man, a junior officer named Morozov, placed his hand on the stone. He collapsed instantly. Kara still breathing. Eyes open, but unresponsive. He remained in a coma for 11 days before waking without memory. But afterward, Morozov wrote obsessively in a language no one could identify, curved symbols in long, repeating sequences. He refused food for weeks, speaking only one word when prompted. But after that, he was transferred to a remote facility. Records trail off from there. The chamber was sealed, the project halted, and all involved were relocated or reassigned. Officially, the site was decommissioned due to seismic instability. Unofficially, guards were posted at the entrance until the late 1980s. To this day, satellite scans occasionally show a mild heat signature emanating from beneath the island's surface. No animals nest near that part of the tundra. No expeditions return to the site. But some researchers claim that, on nights when the Arctic winds are still, strange pulses can be picked up on low-band radios, steady, rhythmic, like a code knocking from far beneath the ice, calling out. Waiting. Story 21. The Static Field. Idaho, 1998. In the summer of 1998, just outside the small town of McCall, Idaho, a retired lineman named Carl Hensley was hiking through an overgrown service road near the Payette National Forest. He was a man of routine. Walk the same loop, sit by the stream, return by sunset. But that evening, the forest felt off. As he approached a clearing where an old radio tower had once stood, his ears began to ring. It wasn't sharp or painful, more like the dull whine of static between stations. He checked his old handheld FM radio out of habit. Dead silence, no signal, just white noise across every band. Then, he noticed the clearing ahead was glowing, faintly, almost imperceptibly, like heat shimmering off asphalt. The air buzzed, dry and charged. His arm hairs stood on end. At the center of the field, where wild grass grew tall, something moved. It wasn't an animal. It was a shape, tall, slim, and faint, as if made of haze or smoke. It swayed slightly, without wind, without sound. Carl called out. The static grew louder. He stepped forward, no more than 10 feet from the figure, and saw that it had no face, no color, just a human-like outline, flickering like a broken television signal, as if it existed between moments. And then he realized there were others. Then came the silence. The static stopped. The figures all turned together toward Carl. He didn't run. He couldn't. His legs felt heavy like underwater. The air thickened. His watch stopped. His radio hissed, then died. The figures shimmered one final time and vanished. The ringing in his ears faded. The grass swayed again, and the post, once blurred, now stood perfectly still. Carl never told anyone. Not at first. But weeks later, he returned with a friend. The field was gone. Not overgrown, flattened, as if everything had been pressed downwards in a perfect circle. No plants, no insects, just scorched earth and the faint scent of ozone. They never found any record of a tower ever having stood there. But Carl kept that broken radio on his shelf. Sometimes, when storms rolled in, and the static would return. Story 22. The Blue Room, New Mexico, 2005. In 2005, a middle-aged man named Paul Keener moved into a rental property on the outskirts of Española, New Mexico. It was a modest adobe house on a quiet patch of desert, far from the noise of town. Cheap, private, and surrounded by silence. But the house had one strange feature. A small side room, windowless, painted a deep, unnatural blue. The landlord called it a storage nook. Paul used it for boxes, tools, and an old reading chair. At first, nothing felt unusual. Until the dreams began. They weren't nightmares. They weren't even frightening, just vivid. A voice whispering numbers. A slow-turning object suspended in the air. A sensation of weightlessness and vast, silent distance. He'd wake at exactly 3:33 a.m. every time. No fear. Just the hum of something he couldn't name. Then came the cold spots. The room, even in summer, stayed 15 degrees cooler than the rest of the house, and Paul swore the walls felt damp some mornings, though no moisture was ever found. One night he left a portable recorder in the blue room, nothing but white noise for hours, until 3:33 a.m., when the static dipped and a soft mechanical click was heard, like a switch being thrown somewhere far beneath the earth. The next day, the chair was facing the opposite direction. He thought he was imagining things. Until the neighbors mentioned something odd. That house, they said, had been vacant for almost a decade. Every tenant before him had left within months. Some didn't even bother to collect deposits. Bad dreams, one neighbor muttered, and things that show up in mirrors. Paul began to feel watched. Not in the bedroom, not in the living room, only in the blue room. One night, unable to sleep, he sat in the chair with the door cracked just slightly. He turned off all the lights and waited. At 3:33 a.m., the room filled with an unnatural glow. Not from a bulb, not from outside, just light, as if it leaked in from a place behind the walls. And for the briefest moment, the far side of the room was deeper, like a tunnel had opened, just beyond the range of vision. Then it was gone. Paul moved out a week later. He never unpacked the boxes. He never returned for the deposit. But he left a note in the mailbox for the next tenant. It read only, "Don't sit in the chair after 3:30. Story 23. The Ferryman's Tape, Louisiana, 1993. In the still heat of the summer of 1993, Claude Duval lived alone in a sagging cabin by the Atchafalaya River just outside Morgan City, Louisiana. Once a ferryman, Claude had spent most of his life carrying strangers across slow-moving water in the dark hours of the morning. But the ferry shut down years ago, and the dock was now rotting. Still, he stayed. The river, for all its moods, made him feel less alone. Claude had trouble sleeping. Always had. So he kept a little cassette recorder by his bed and would talk into it late at night, sometimes telling old fairy tales, sometimes singing old Cajun lullabies to no one. It comforted him, the soft click of the buttons, the slow whirl of tape, his voice echoing back. One night, during a thunderstorm, Claude sat on the porch and recorded the sound of the rain hitting the river. The next morning, he rewound the tape, expecting only the crack of thunder and distant frogs. But at exactly 3:13 a.m. on the tape, there was a voice. Quiet, gravelly, not his. "Then you rye," it said, barely above a whisper. "Take them across." Claude froze. Replayed it 5 times. Always the same phrase, always the same tone. Not scared, just flat, distant. Not a plea, not a command, just a statement. He dismissed it at first. Maybe the wind had warped something. Maybe it was just an echo of his own voice bouncing wrong. But curiosity got the better of him. He started going through his old tapes, dozens of them, some from months prior, and there it was. Again, different nights, different tapes. Take them across. Sometimes louder, sometimes just a breath. Then came the other sounds. Chain clinks, wood creaking, water lapping, bare feet stepping, soft, slow. Once on a tape, recorded with no one around, there was a faint splash, and then a low humming, like a lullaby sung underwater. Claude stopped sleeping entirely. He placed the recorder out on the dock one night to catch whatever it was. In the morning, the tape ended abruptly. The final sounds: wet footsteps, a rope tightening, and something heavy shifting. Then silence. The strange part? The tape had stopped recording with nearly half the spool left. Batteries were new, no errors. That same day, Claude found a single set of wet footprints on the porch. Small. There. Leading toward the river, not away. He packed his suitcase and left by sundown. Weeks later, a maintenance man inspecting the cabin found a shoebox beneath the bed. Inside were 12 cassette tapes, labeled by date. Along with them, a note written on the back of an old ferry ticket. If they ask you to take them across, don't answer. The river remembers its dead. The ferry dock has since collapsed, but on misty nights, locals say they still hear the click of cassette wheels turning somewhere near the water, and sometimes, at 3:13 a.m., the current changes direction for just a few minutes. Story 24. The Spiral Sky, Mongolia, 1981. In the remote Khovsgol province of northern Mongolia, where the land is vast and the winters are long, there lies a stretch of open tundra that nomadic herders have quietly avoided for generations. They call it Shigursun Nuru, which means the sleeping sky. In 1981, a young Russian meteorologist named Yelena Antonov was assigned to a temporary outpost in that very region. The Soviet Union had dispatched her and 2 others to install early warning weather sensors near the border. It was a quiet mission, cold, tedious, and for the most part uneventful. until the third week. That night, the sky was clear. Not a cloud, not a flicker of wind. Yelena stepped outside just after 2 a.m. to relieve herself behind the station. That's when she saw it. Above the ridge to the north, the stars began to twist. Slowly at first, then tightening into a massive spiral. Not spinning like a storm, but turning as if space itself were being wound inward. She stood frozen, mouth open, breath catching in the sharp air. The spiral pulsed once, and then a beam, not of light but of emptiness, poured down into the open plain. It was like the world had a hole punched through it. She called out to her colleagues, but they were already outside, staring. None of them moved. For what felt like several minutes, the spiral remained silent and immense. Then shapes, small, insect-like, began to emerge in the air just above the tundra. Not solid, not visible in full, like outlines half-finished. They hovered, shifted, then scattered into nothing. The spiral reversed itself. The stars snapped back. The night returned. They didn't speak of it. 2 days later, one of her colleagues left camp without a coat or supplies. He was found weeks later, 10 kilometers away, curled in a frozen crater, his eyes open but his body untouched by predators. His tape recorder, half buried in snow, had only one clear sound captured. A long, rising tone that seemed to vibrate through bone. Yelena resigned the following spring. She never published her notes, but in a handwritten letter to her sister, she described what she saw as a window that opened into somewhere we were not meant to look. Years later, a satellite photo of the region captured a circular burn mark, faint but exact, where the spiral had appeared. No one could explain it. And if you stand beneath them too long, something starts to hum inside your chest. Story 25. The Night Window, Finland, 1996. In the deep winter of 1996, Lena Sani returned to her childhood home in Lapland, far above the Arctic Circle, where the nights stretched endlessly and the snow covered everything like a silent tide. She had come to care for her father, whose memory was slipping in small, sad pieces. The house sat on the edge of a pine forest, its back windows facing a wide, frozen expanse that ran for miles. There were no streetlights, no neighbors for kilometers, just wind and the crunch of snow underfoot. It began on the third night after she arrived. The power had gone out, as it often did in January. Wrapped in a blanket, Lena sat in the living room with a candle flickering beside her. She glanced toward the window. At first, she thought it was moonlight catching in the snow, but then it moved. A square of soft, bluish light hovered in the forest, maybe 50 meters from the house, perfectly rectangular, suspended in the air like a doorway hung in the dark. It shimmered slightly, and inside it, colors shifted, shapes moved, like stained glass sliding through water. She stared for several minutes before it faded. The next night, it returned. Same time, same place. The third night, the window came closer, only 20 meters from the tree line now. The figures stood still behind it. Then, one turned slowly, as though looking straight at her. Lena backed away from the window. She tried to photograph it the next night, but the film came back blank. she left a tape recorder near the back wall. When she played it in the morning, there was nothing but static. Then a faint clicking sound. Soft, irregular, like a broken watch trying to tick. Her father, who barely spoke anymore, muttered without prompting that afternoon. "They knocked when I was young. Same light, same place." We didn't answer. Lena froze. The next night, the window appeared just at the edge of the forest. She closed all the curtains and sat in the dark, heart pounding. The power was still out. The wind had stopped. Everything was too still. Then came 3 slow taps on the glass. She opened the curtain just an inch. There was nothing outside, but her own reflection stared back at her. And in the reflection, the window behind her was open, and something was standing inside. She didn't sleep. She packed bags, woke her father before dawn. By the time the sun finally rose behind the clouds, they were gone. The house was left behind, locked and sealed. It remains empty. But those who pass through that stretch of Lapland on long winter nights say the back window of the old Sarni house sometimes glows with pale blue light. No one sees figures. No one hears tapping. But when the wind is still, a few claim the snow near the trees won't settle in one perfect rectangle, as if something waits there, patient and quiet, for someone to look back. Story 26. The Red Fog, Newfoundland, 1978. In a remote fishing village along Newfoundland's jagged coastline, the wind came in from the sea with a weight that seemed to carry memory. Salt, silence, a rhythm older than the land itself. On the far edge of a cliff, a lighthouse stood stubborn against the Atlantic storms, manned by one man, Bill Kavanagh. At 53, Bill lived a life of quiet routine. He recorded wind direction, sea swells, and barometric pressure by hand in a leather-bound logbook. Each entry was neat, dated, trusted. The logbook was his map of time, each page a reassurance that the world still made sense. Until the morning, the fog rolled in. It was just after dawn on August 2nd, 1978. Bill noticed something unusual in the distance. A fog bank, thick and low, but tinged red at the edges, like rust in milk. He'd seen plenty of fog before, but this one moved differently. Not drifting, but gliding, slicing across the ocean's surface in a perfectly straight line. By the time it reached the cliff, the world vanished. Sound became muffled, like cotton stuffed in his ears. The sea, always audible, fell silent. His radio gave only static. He stood in the tower, squinting through the window, but could barely see his own boots. Now, then came the voices. They weren't loud, more like whispers from a room 2 doors down. Not panicked, conversational, but the language wasn't quite right. Familiar sounds strung into unfamiliar shapes. He climbed the lighthouse stairs to get above the fog. But it was already there. It had risen with him, pushing against the glass like it wanted in. Bill turned on the VHF radio. Static. Then a low, pulsing tone steady as a heartbeat. Finally, speech, fractured, echoing. A male voice repeated a string of numbers. Ka. Ko. Bill wrote them down, then checked his charts. They pointed to a spot in the North Atlantic that, as far as any map showed, held nothing but open water. A void. Outside, lights began to move in the red fog. Soft, cold glows drifting like jellyfish, blue and white, blinking in patterns that didn't repeat. Not flares, not boat lights. He stood watching, frozen. Then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the fog recoiled. It peeled back in a sweeping motion out to sea and was gone. The sky returned. The sound of waves returned. The world returned. But something had changed. On the shoreline below the lighthouse, 3 wide, circular impressions had been left in the grass, perfectly spaced, perfectly shaped. Not footprints, not tire marks, just indentations. And beside the lighthouse door, something waited. A page torn from Bill's logbook. He picked it up, frowning. The handwriting was neat, his own, but the ink was wrong, fainter, watery. And at the top of the page, the date read, August 3rd, 1978. A full day ahead. The entry described the red fog in detail, exactly what had happened, except he kept the page, said nothing. In the 5 years he remained at the lighthouse, the fog never returned until the spring of 1983. Far out on the horizon, just past the edge of the shipping lanes, he spotted it again. Red. Still. Watching. Story 27. The Whistler. Utah, 2002. In the red sands outside Moab, Utah, the desert stretches out like a frozen sea. Quiet, cracked, and ancient. In the fall of 2002, Dr. Aaron Malloy, a university geologist, camped alone near the edge of a dry plateau to complete a 2-week survey on regional rock formations. It wasn't unusual work. Just rocks, layers, time captured in stone. The solitude didn't bother her. She welcomed it. She kept a digital recorder by her cot where she logged daily observations and thoughts. The first 2 nights were uneventful. Wind across the canvas, the occasional cry of a distant coyote. The 3rd night, something changed. At exactly 2:41 a.m., she awoke to a sound. 3 soft, rising whistles, not birds, not wind. Each tone was clear, distinct, separated by silence. She sat up and listened. Nothing followed. Just the cold air pressing against the tent walls. The next night, 2:41 a.m. again. Same 3 whistles. Closer. She wrote it off as wind tunneling strangely through the canyons, but her professional curiosity kicked in. She set up her audio recorder just outside the tent, aiming toward the sound's direction. That night, it came again. Same pattern, louder. The ground seemed to hold the tone a moment longer than it should have. The playback revealed something odd. Beneath the whistles were faint harmonic frequencies, tones outside the normal range of human hearing. Interference or a signal? By the 5th night, Erin noticed that her GPS tracker lost signal every time the whistling began. At 2:41, her coordinates froze. She marked the anomaly. Later, blue flashes appeared above the ridges, brief, pulsing like Morse code. Not lightning. Clear sky. No storm. On the 6th night, her digital recorder, used to log daily geology entries, auto-erased every voice note she'd made. Gone without prompt. She began sleeping with her boots on. Then came the final night. Again at 2:41, the whistle. But this time, right outside the tent. 3 short notes. Then silence. Erin froze, then slowly unzipped the flap. No one was there. Nothing moved. But the recorder clipped to her jacket had activated on its own. She played it back the next morning. Amid a hiss of desert wind, her own voice whispered, "Follow the tone. You've already seen them." Except she never said it. Outside the tent, the ground was covered in circular indentations, perfect rings pressed into hard-packed sand, spaced like a diagram, not footprints. Erin ended the expedition that day. Months later, she came across a SETI report from 1989. A radio telescope in California had logged an identical whistle pattern, marked unexplained atmospheric distortion, and archived. She didn't publish any of it. But in lectures, when discussing signal anomalies, she sometimes plays the sound, just to see. Once, during a conference in Nevada, a man in the back row stood up and walked out as soon as the tone played. Then up, and as he left, he whistled the exact pattern. 3 soft notes. Then, he was gone. Story 28, The Orchard Lights, Oregon, 1974. In the misty hills of Oregon's Willamette Valley, Thomas Brewer tended his small apple orchard as he had done every autumn since retiring. It was quiet work, honest, grounding. The trees were old, some over a century. Their twisted branches curled like hands in prayer, and each fall they dropped their fruit in slow, sweet surrender. That October, the fog came earlier than usual. Thick, pearled layers rolled in just after dusk and lingered until mid-morning. On the first strange night, Thomas rose before dawn to check the north fence. That's when he saw them. Three pale blue lights, no larger than lanterns, floated between the rows of trees. They didn't flicker. They didn't cast shadows. They moved slowly, deliberately, like something thinking. He blinked, and they were gone. He told no one, but the next morning the dog refused to enter the northern rows, hackles raised. His grandson, Owen, visiting for the week, asked why there were people talking in the trees. Thomas said it was just wind and sleep talking. But each night, the lights returned. Always 3. Always just before dawn. He started marking their appearance in a notebook. The locations formed no pattern, except they never passed a certain old row of trees, the original line planted by the property's first settler family. The oldest trees. Their bark was cracked black, their limbs sunken low. One morning, beneath those trees, he found apples arranged in a spiral, not fallen, placed, a perfect winding coil with leaves at the center, burned and brittle. There were no footprints in the soil. He tried taking photographs, but the film developed blank, only the outlines of trees. No light, no glow, just emptiness. Then, one night, Thomas followed them. The lights led him deep into the orchard, further than he usually walked. They drifted low, weaving in and out of the trunks like dancers, and then, without sound, They rose, high above the treetops, and vanished into the sky. No trail, no noise, just gone. He returned home to find all the clocks in the house stopped at 4:17 a.m. In the kitchen, a soft hum still vibrated through the floorboards. The dog was missing. A half-eaten apple sat on the table. His tape recorder, left running on the counter, had captured only static, until a slow tapping began, like the click of bone on metal. Then, silence. He never told Owen, never told anyone. A year later, after a harsh winter, Thomas sold the orchard. The new owner cleared much of the land, including the ancient row near the spiral. While digging stumps, a worker found something buried beneath one of the oldest trees. A hollow pocket in the earth, lined with scorched soil and fragments of melted glass. It was never explained. The hole was filled in, and the event forgotten. But local kids still sneak onto the land some nights, hoping to see the orchard lights. Sometimes, the lights notice them too. Story 29. The Shepherd's Watch, Albania, 1985. In the deep folds of the Albanian Alps, where the snow settles like silence and the stars crowd thick overhead, lived an old shepherd named Adam Kodra. His stone hut sat alone above the village, surrounded by his flock and the stillness of winter. Adam was 67, his life marked by the rhythm of hooves, weather, and long wordless nights. He carried with him an old carved talisman, worn smooth with time, believed to keep sky spirits at bay. A relic from his grandfather's time, a story, nothing more. Or so he thought. One night in January, Adam stepped outside just before midnight to check on the sheep. The air was dry and cutting cold. The stars were sharp and unmoving, except for one small cluster just above the ridge. He stared. The stars shifted. Not falling, not blinking. They moved in tandem, sliding left across the sky, then froze. At that moment, a thin beam of white light flickered silently across the pasture. It touched the far slope for no more than a second, then vanished. He said nothing. By morning, 2 sheep were gone. Their tracks led nowhere, just ended. At the spot where the beam had landed, the snow was blackened, perfectly round, as if burned from above. Over the next 3 nights, the pattern repeated. The subtle motion in the stars, a beam, vanishing sheep. No sound, no tracks, only the scorch marks and the smell of singed frost. Adem's dog, once loyal and fearless, now refused to leave the hut after dark. Its ears pressed flat, eyes fixed on the sky. On the 4th evening, just as dusk began to fall, a sound hummed through the mountains. Not thunder, not wind. An atonic vibration, low and constant, that seemed to press into the bones. Adem followed it to the cliffside above the pasture. There, hovering silently over the valley, was a shape. Triangular, matte black, no lights, no movement, massive but weightless. It hung in the sky like an idea, utterly still. And then it vanished. That night, The flock began pacing in circles, slowly, methodically, as if led by something unseen. Adem tried to calm them, but they moved together, entranced. He found one sheep with a strange wound on its neck, a tiny incision, bloodless, with something metallic beneath the skin. He cut it out carefully, a smooth, silver sliver, no seams or markings, cold to the touch even in his hand. He left it on a stone outside the hut. By morning, it was gone. That night, just before dawn, Adem woke with a jolt. The dog whined low, teeth bared toward the window. A figure stood at the tree line. The flock's tall, still, limbs too long. Its body shimmered faintly, as if struggling to stay shaped in this world. It made no sound, just watched. Adam didn't move. By the time first night arrived, it had vanished. He never told the villagers, just began carving new talismans, different now, stranger. He hung them across the pasture, stopped letting anyone near. Years later, his grandson found an old journal buried in a wooden chest, full of star maps, spiral patterns, and sketches of impossible shapes. The last page held a single sentence, scratched in trembling hand. The sky watches back. Some nights it steps closer. Story 30. The Mirror Lake Echo, Montana, 1993. Tucked deep within the pine-shrouded ridges of western Montana lies a quiet body of water locals call Mirror Lake. It's small, pristine, fed by glacial runoff and surrounded by peaks that keep it still even in the windiest weather. In the summer of 1993, Dana Reyes, a seasonal ranger, was stationed at the lake alone. It was early in the season. No campers yet, no hikers. Just silence, solitude, and the sound of her boots on pine needles. Dana liked the isolation. She'd served in the military but preferred calm now. Days were spent checking trails and updating maps. At night, she logged her reports in a spiral notebook and made routine check-ins over the ranger radio. Everything was normal. Until the fifth night. That evening, just after dusk, she stepped outside to listen to the forest breathe. Then she heard something strange, an echo. She hadn't said anything. No animal had called. But from across the still lake, a faint sound came back, delayed by several seconds, distant and low. She paused, then cleared her throat. Again, the delay, but the echo that returned was wrong, too soft, slightly stretched, as if mimicking the shape of her sound rather than reflecting it. She made a note in her logbook and went inside. The next night, the same thing happened, only now the echo came from beneath the lake. Ha-na-na. Each time she made a sound, a faint reply bubbled up from the water's center. It was subtle, like hearing someone breathing through glass. She walked to the dock and stared down. The water was black, perfect, still. Her reflection stared back, but the stars it showed weren't right. There were more of them, and they twinkled in unfamiliar patterns. She didn't sleep that night. On the third night, she began recording. She whispered phrases into her tape recorder, then replayed the audio with headphones. Between the natural echo and the playback, she heard whispers layered beneath, distorted, echoing her words in an almost familiar voice. The wildlife around. On the fourth night, Dana stood on the dock again. At exactly 2:07 a.m., A perfect circle of ripples formed in the center of the lake. No fish, no wind. The water bulged slightly upward, like something breathing in. Then it flattened again. She looked down at her reflection and saw it smile. She hadn't. She backed away. That night, her compass spun wildly. GPS failed. When she tried to radio the district office, the transmission buzzed with static. Then a voice crackled through. Her own. Mirror Lake, Station 9. This is Dana Reyes. You're already inside. The voice was calm, identical, and it didn't wait for a reply. Dana never transmitted again. When Rangers arrived weeks later, the cabin was clean, undisturbed. Her pack and journal were gone. Her boots were beside the dock, no footprints in the mud. To this day, hikers say the lake sometimes speaks. If you're quiet enough and close to the water, you might hear someone calling for help from underneath. And sometimes, when the night is clear, the reflection of the lake shows two moons, even when the sky above shows none.
If you found this video helpful or interesting, go ahead and click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you'll always stay updated with our latest content. We truly appreciate your support.